So welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this new webinar, and my very special guest today is my teacher, my mentor and friend, Dr. Dicken Bettinger. And for those of you who don't know Dicken, he's a PhD psychologist, and he's been teaching the three principles, this understanding that I'm sharing with everybody in my Facebook group for long COVID sufferers. And he met Sydney Banks back in the 1980s, the originator of these ideas. So he's been teaching this for a very long time. And what makes it more special for me to interview him today is because he was one of the first people to get coronavirus back in 2020. So Dicken, welcome to my webinar. It's so nice to see you. I was wondering if we could start by you telling us a bit about how you got the illness and what it was like for you right back in the beginning, because nobody knew what was going on right back then.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's really nice to be here. My wife was singing in a large choral group, and they had a rehearsal, and of the like 60 people there, 58 of them came down with the virus. It became big news. It was one of the first large groups in the United States to have that happen. And so my wife came home thinking, after a few days, she started thinking she had a cold or the flu. And she had a relatively mild case. For about 5 days, she was really under the weather. And she got over it, and then I came down with it, and I had a really bad case for about 2.5 weeks. A lot of pain, headaches constantly. I now understand what they mean by brain fog. I mean, I had trouble thinking. My wife says I didn't talk for the whole time, which is very unusual if you know me. And I have a new respect for the term fatigue. Right. It was so hard for me to do anything. Like if I, excuse me about this, but if I had to go to the bathroom, the thought of that scared me, because I would have to walk 10 or 15 steps. Right. And by the time I got back to the couch, I had to take a nap. Wow. I was so tired. Mm-hmm. And I was sleeping long hours, day and night. I could not get comfortable. Now, I was very fortunate because it didn't go into my lungs. Mm. And that was my biggest fear. And if I started thinking about that, it was interesting. I would immediately go to, if it goes into my lungs, I'll go to the hospital. I'm now hearing that people who go to the hospital, they have to put on the ventilator, and most of them never get off, and the families can't see them. So if I started thinking I might go to the hospital, never see my family again, and die, it scared the living daylights out of me. But fortunately, then I would recognize, wait a minute, that hasn't happened. I'm not in the hospital. I'm just thinking this up right now. And when I would stop thinking about that, that fear just went right away. Right. And I have long-term, I still have fatigue. I'm one of the long haulers in terms of fatigue, and it's been over 2 years.
Wow. Yeah. So when I started reading and researching about long COVID, I was kind of really curious to find out that a lot of the people who are getting long COVID as a diagnosis weren't the people who were actually hospitalized. And I kind of had a suspicion. I thought, because like you said, if you're hospitalized, you're put on a ventilator, you kind of are cut off from the outside world. And I'm thinking maybe the people who are still suffering terrible symptoms with long COVID now were staying home and watching the news 24/7 and scaring themselves with a lot of the information that was, being sent out, 24/7. Do you think that could have play a part in how other symptoms start cropping up and how it's so confusing now that people don't really know what's long COVID and what isn't?
Well, I do know that there is a direct connection between how I think about how I'm feeling and how I end up feeling.
Right. Right.
And my wife, for example, we would both get the flu or a cold, let's say a cold. And she would not even give it a thought. She would take a hot bath, take vitamin C and zinc, and just not talk about it, not think about it. I would get a cold and I couldn't stop talking about it and thinking about it. She says, "You have the man flu."
Right. I was gonna ask, that's what I was thinking.
You have the man flu. I can't believe it. I mean, you're such a
Right.
baby. I mean, every little symptom is like, oh my God,
Right.
gee, I'm done. And she helped me realize that my whole life had created a story in my head about being sick so that I gave an awful lot of thinking to it.
Right.
And she grew up in a family where they didn't do that, and it wasn't a big deal to be sick. And they assumed that you were basically healthy and would get over it. And obviously you take care of yourself and you do what you need to do, but it was a very different way of thinking about physical discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, as you know, I've been working with people with chronic pain for, a few years now. And I'm noticing that a lot of the symptoms that people are posting about in, several Facebook groups with long COVID, the symptoms are very similar to what I see with my clients with chronic pain. Meaning, I was making a list of it. It's like insomnia, stomach pains, headaches, muscle pain, dizziness. It kind of goes on. And I've kind of learned from a lot of my research that a lot of that is coming from what we call a dysregulated nervous system. And seeing how, like you said, that constant stressful thinking is then our bodies are screaming at us to slow down.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could kind of explain the connection between thinking and how that's manifesting, physically, how experience is really created.
Well, it's now very scientific that we're always involved in mental activity or we'd be brain dead.
Right.
Right. So we're always, in a sense, we're always having mental activity happening, and it's being created in us. And that whatever we think, immediately it's brought to life as our feeling experience, our felt experience.
Right.
And so it's simple and logical. You have an anxious thought, you feel anxious. You have a sad thought, you feel sad. You have a loving thought, you feel loving. It's a one-to-one correlation. And yet, even though I had been a psychologist for 10 years, no one at that time had realized that 100% of our felt experience was created by thought.
Right.
And that when our thinking changes, our experience changes. Even when I was in the hospital, and one time I was in the hospital for emergency abdominal operations. And at one point I was in enormous pain. and I'm consumed with thinking about my pain.
Right.
And I realized after a while that I was thinking things like, I can't stand this. Then I would feel that thought. This is torture. Then I would feel that thought. That's powerful.
Right.
This is going on forever. Then I would feel that helplessness and that thought. And I was just one thought after another. And all of a sudden I realized I was completely consumed with these thoughts. And I looked up, I came back to the present moment. I looked up, there's a beautiful tree out the window. And I feel that. I go, oh, that's beautiful. I see the clock on the wall, just sort of neutral thought.
Mm-hmm.
I see my wife's face, who's very compassionate because she sees how much pain I'm in.
Right.
And I feel love. Then I feel how tenderly the nurse is holding my hand. And I immediately and spontaneously say to her, thank you so much for being so kind to me while we're going through this. And then I felt pain again.
Right.
But it wasn't all consuming. It was beauty, neutral, compassion, love,
Right.
tenderness, pain.
Yeah.
And it was a powerful example of how we're living in a thought created reality, whether we know it or not.
Right. Right. Because you reminded me how when I was reading lots of pain science and research, there's lots of evidence to show that the lower state of mind we're in, the more the pain's going to feel intense. When we're in a
Yes.
better state of mind, you could have actually the same physical thing, the same pain, but you're going to experiencing it quite differently.
Yes. There's no question about that. Even in dramatic examples, many years ago, my wife and I were in a very bad car accident. Our car rolled at 70 miles an hour for about half a mile.
Gosh.
And we ended up on the side and there was a fire in the engine. My wife is unconscious. We had seatbelts on, so I took my seatbelt off. I was above her.
Wow.
And I dropped down and went out through the windshield. Somebody came running down the road and we pushed the car back up on the wheel. The fire was going. I'm thinking the car is going to explode. I'm trying to get my wife out of the car. I can't, the door is jammed. We finally get her out of the car. She's unconscious and becoming conscious, and she has no idea where she is or what's happened. She can't remember what we'd been doing for the last couple of weeks. And we had to wait 20 minutes before an ambulance got there to take us to the hospital. We had to wait half an hour before we were able to be attended to. It was a very small hospital in the middle of the night, and the one doctor was sleeping and they wouldn't wake him up.
Oh, wow.
I've never heard of such a thing, but anyways, I mean, they were with us and monitoring us, and the doctor comes in and I say, please take care of my wife. He examines her, takes care of her. And then he comes over to me and he says, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm amazing. I have bruises, but I have a chipped tooth. I'm fine. He says, what about all that blood? I say, what do you mean? He says, well, look. And on my back side, there was blood all the way down to my shoes.
Wow.
And I pull up my shirt and there's this huge gouge taken out of my side. I had experienced no pain until I saw that. And when I saw it, ow, 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 and he said, let me take a look. No, don't touch it.
Wow. Wow.
Now, the body is engineered so that in times of trauma, often we go into shock. And
Right.
so it helps us, in a sense, not to focus on and think about the pain.
Right.
And it's a survival protection mechanism so that you can deal with whatever crisis you're going through.
Right.
But as soon as I had the thought,
Right.
I experienced enormous pain and was aware of it from then after.
Right. So from an understanding of the three principles, what would you want to tell people that are feeling the fatigue, the brain fog, day after day, on and on and on? How can this understanding help someone who feels that they're never going to get better, that this is never going to end?
Well, that thought would certainly create a feeling, wouldn't it?
Right.
It's almost like, without realizing it, we're creating a movie in our head and then we're living in the experience of that movie.
Right.
And all we need to do is begin to become aware of that we're thinkers, and that whatever we think we will experience. And if you let go of thoughts that are creating tension, stress, or upset, we come back to the present moment. It's built into us then for that thinking to pass. This is how we get over feelings and experiences. Thinking passes, the movie changes,
Right.
not through our effort, not by trying to think positive. You let go of the old, and the intelligence behind this human system will create a new movie that's more uplifting. That's why when people can be terribly upset and then a friend comes over and they stop thinking about the upset and they feel really good, their movie has changed.
Right.
And the fact that people can understand the possibility that they can change their mind by letting go of the old, and then something new and fresh can come in,
Mm-hmm.
that understanding is transformative for people in their lives. Because then when we're in physical pain, there is a tendency of humans to begin to think in ways that create more stress, more tension, more upset. And we know for a fact that that affects our immune system, it affects our experience, it determines how we experience what we're going through. So that when we begin to understand that thought creates our feelings, we're more particular about what thoughts we continue to hold on to and think about. Right. As we start to feel that, wait a minute, like in the hospital when I realized I am thinking like end of the world, horrible, this, I'm being tortured. I mean, right. What does that make the nurse? I mean, I don't like the nurse because she's involved in creating this pain.
Right.
Right. So it's like, and then as soon as I realized, wait a minute, I didn't try and think positive. I just let go of my horror movie. And right away, I became more aware of my surroundings and could experience beauty and compassion and love and kindness. And then pain would come in, but it was no longer dominating my life and experience.
Right.
And I've seen that now over and again when I've been sick, or even when I feel fatigue. In the past, I would have man-flued the fatigue, if you know what I mean. And now it's just like, well, I'm tired. I don't think about it. It doesn't affect my well-being. It's not a big deal. And I just do what I need to do. I take naps now, and I didn't used to. Big deal. It's sort of nice to take a nap, it's just, I just don't make it worse.
Right.
by adding a whole nother layer of stress, which we know stressful thinking affects our biochemistry. Every thought we have affects our biochemistry, and it changes our relationship to experience.
Yeah, you reminded me when, you know, I suffered chronic pain for 25 years, and I remember the doctors would tell me, oh, it's because you've got one leg longer than the other, and so that's why your pelvis is unstable, and that's why your back keeps going out. And because I'm not medically trained, I'd go, okay. And I had this picture in my head that my spine was weak, and I couldn't do, like, even putting on my seatbelt, you know, like that would, you know, set my muscles spasming. And so my world got very small and very frightening. So I know a lot of the people I've spoken to, they're like, yeah, but what if there's something wrong? What if it's going to go wrong? So I love what you're saying, how even if there is something medically, you know, that's being treated, our thinking about it is going to make the whole experience even worse. And it doesn't have to be, right?
And I think of it as there's sometimes, like if somebody hit me with a stick really hard, I'd feel pain.
Right.
But where my thinking goes determines what happens in my experience. If someone says something to me and I go, oh, that was rude, that could be a passing thought that doesn't take away my enjoyment of life and well-being, or that one thought, this is rude, I could continue that story, take that to be truth, continue the story, and spend the next day, week, month,
decade
dwelling on, I can't believe they treated me this way.
Right.
This is rude. And built a movie around that I would then be living in.
Right. And I think that's a really,
I used to do
oh, me too. I think it's a really important point, because a lot of the people I've spoken to, doctors don't understand long COVID, their families don't understand long COVID, they don't understand what people are going through. And then it's very easy to slip into that, nobody understands, you know, there's no cure, this is going to be my life forever. So it's so refreshing to know that there's a way out of that.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, definitely. Makes me think when my daughter was 14 and she started learning how thought creates experience. There was one time she was really upset, and it was the first time she sort of caught herself thinking up a movie.
Right.
And all of a sudden she realized somebody said something to me 3 hours ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since. That's why right now I'm feeling what I'm feeling. Right now, I'm not feeling what I'm feeling because of what somebody said to me 3 hours ago.
Right.
I've been thinking about it all this time. And it was a life-changing realization for her, because she would dwell on and think about things for days. And when she stopped doing that, every single one of our friends said, oh my God, what happened to your daughter? I can't believe how much she's changed. She went from being a 14-year-old who was very emotional and dramatic and upset a lot to being like a 35-year-old poised, confident woman who is very resilient. And it was evident in her posture, in her voice, in her way of looking at life.
Mm-hmm.
And then she comes home from school one day and she says, Dad, I can't believe it. Every one of my friends is doing it. And I get concerned, like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? And she goes, every one of my friends gets upset. That's normal. You have an upsetting thought, you're going to feel it. You can't stop it from coming into your head. It comes in, you feel it. But then they keep thinking about it and talking about it and thinking about it and talking about it. And they keep that feeling alive. They innocently keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it.
Yeah.
she started seeing what it is that we're prone to do as humans if we don't understand the role of thought in creating our moment-to-moment felt experience.
Great. So amazing. That's an amazing place to end, because I think, if people can really see this, I mean, people I'm working with already with long COVID are getting better. One guy,
Yeah.
he's already back to work. He's already playing with his kid, driving, exercising, and he's seen through that illusion. So it doesn't have to be a life
Yes.
sentence.
Yeah,
And
it
this
doesn't.
understanding is so powerful that it's returned him back to his life. In fact, he wrote to me the other day saying he feels better than he did before because of the insights he's gotten through this. It's like it's put him on another level of appreciating life, of gratitude, and all those amazing things that we work hard to get, but it just kind of came to him as a gift of seeing it all differently. So I just wanted to, so for people who are listening, where can they find out about you or these ideas?
I now have an official YouTube channel that a friend helped me put together. It's just on YouTube, Dicken Bettinger channel. And it has many of my talks about the role thought plays in creating experience and how an understanding of that can change one's life. I've written a book called Coming Home, Uncovering the Foundations of Psychological Well-Being.
It's very good.
So
one of my favorites.
that's available, which is where I introduce this to people who are new to it. So that might be a good place for someone to start.
Yeah.
And then my teacher was a man named Sidney Banks. And if people are interested, at www.sydbanks.com, you can hear someone who had a extremely profound realization of how we live in a thought-created reality, and how he went from being a very unhappy welder with a 9th grade education to becoming a world teacher.
Right.
So that's another resource for people.
It's great.
And of course, painless.
Oh.
People should read your book on painless.
Thank you. Thank you.
Then they would definitely have a better idea. So skip my videos and go straight to Hannah's book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I really appreciate your time today for joining us. And if people listening have questions, I'll put all the information at the end of the video so they can contact us. And here's to good health. Thank you.
Here's to good health. Thanks.